Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be another hair tutorial. I have done a couple of these in the past, which I will link in a card up above. So I have done a blonde hair tutorial and a red hair tutorial, but they have both been like longer hair. So I wanted to do more of a shorter hair tutorial. So as you can see, I'm drawing Frodo from Lord of the Rings today, and the reference photo I'm using is a little bit dark and dramatic. So there's a lot of shadows and there's not a lot of detail in the hair. So I thought I would do a quick tutorial and give some tips on how you can sort of portray this look if your reference photo is something similar. Frodo's hair is kind of messy and there are a few dramatic highlights, and then the rest of his hair is very dark. You can't really see what's going on. So I've sketched out a little bit of detail. So I kind of like to sketch my hair in a way where I can see where all the shapes are, and I can see where some of the locks of hair that are sort of out of place are supposed to go, so I don't have to figure that out later. I'm also going to be using Caran d'Ache luminance pencils and some polychromos. So normally when I draw hair, I like to start from light to dark and I'm really gentle with it, but since it's such a dark photo and I can't really see much of what's going on, I'm not going to waste too much time starting with a very light layer and building it up. Instead, I'm going to sort of fill in most of the shadowed areas while keeping the shape. So I want to make sure that the waviness, the effect of it looking wavy, is preserved. I'm using mostly a black pencil and a sepia pencil for this, and I'm just marking in where some of the shapes go and making sure that I am creating lines that go in the right directions of what the reference photo looks like. And then for some of the highlights, I'm going to use like a light beige as well as a light purple and a light blue color, just because it's kind of a dramatic photo. There's a lot of light reflections going on, so I am going to put a little bit of color in the highlights. You can see as I'm working on one specific lock of hair, I leave a few spaces for the highlight and then I fill in the rest pretty dark, and then at the end I kind of go in and add some more color to that highlight to give it a little bit more life. Now the problem with this photo is there really weren't a ton of highlights, so I was pretty much filling most of the areas in pretty dark, but I didn't want to go in and push too hard to start, so I kind of went in and started with a medium pressure, which I then built up. If you're drawing something more dramatic, don't be afraid to add a few interesting colors in, because often there are weird colors reflected. Also, a quick tip, if you're using Caran d'Ache luminance, or maybe some other pencil brands have this issue too, the sepia might be a little bit more warm toned than you would like, and that's sort of what happened to me here. So the sepia in the Faber-Castell Polychromo set is pretty dark and pretty close to black, and that is not the same for the Caran d'Ache luminance set, and that's what I noticed while I was doing this drawing. But anyway, I'm using that sepia to sort of illustrate where those shapes are at the bottom towards his neck. You also notice that I'm adding some shadows between the skin and the hair, just to make it look like the hair isn't too cartoony. I kind of want it to look more natural. So I use in the Caran d'Ache set, it's a sepia 50%, I believe, or 10%, but in another set you can just use any shadowed color that you might see. So for instance, if the reference photo is cool toned, you could use like maybe a purple tone or something like that, or you could even use a brown tone and just sort of add a shadow between the skin and the hair, so it looks like the hair is falling over the skin and not just kind of plastered on there. Now you can also see towards the bottom, the hair is short, of course. His hair is short, so you kind of have to create that look of the end of the locks of hair. And I'm using a lighter beige color to sort of create more of a highlight. And what I like to do is I use a little bit of the sepia or the black, but usually the sepia. Add some sepia to parts of the locks of the hair, and then maybe in the middle there's a bit of more of the beige color. I'll probably point out which lock I'm talking about so it's not too confusing, but I just like to create sort of an illusion that there's light hitting a certain point of a lock of hair. Even as I'm building this up though, you can see that it's very dark and there aren't a ton of details, and you still want it to look realistic, so you still want to make sure that you're adding in that shape and highlight, but you also have to keep in mind that it is going to overall be a pretty dark, sort of shadowed result. I found this part to be a bit tricky, was creating this lock of hair that sort of goes over his forehead, and blending that in and making it not look too unrealistic or cartoonish. You can start to see the effect that using that light purple or even light bluish tone gives in the highlights. It kind of gives it a little bit of depth And kind of what makes this whole thing look more realistic is creating strands of flyaway hairs, which you can easily do just by flicking your pencil across the paper to create sort of a natural look and just create a bunch of flyaway strands of hair. I used both the sepia and a light beige color to do this. I didn't use black because I thought it might be a little bit too harsh and I wanted this to look more natural. Also, I apologize for this part when things get a little bit grainy and off focused. I think my camera just went out of focus for this part, but I'm kind of just filling in a bit of the hair above his forehead, which happened to be extremely dark. So as you can see, I kind of just filled in the color there and didn't pay too much attention to shapes or anything because I really couldn't see what was going on. And then I did use a little stick like detail eraser to pull out some highlights as well. So that's a great way to pull out highlights, and it makes it easier because you don't have to worry about them till towards the end. I hope you can tell that that weird shape in the middle is his ear, by the way, because I wasn't sure if you could tell because it's kind of weird looking, but if you're wondering, that is in fact his ear. If you can see, there are some hairs that are kind of like flyaways, and I kind of drew the ends of them in a beige color towards the right hand side, and then I added some sepia in some areas to make it look like it's hair and then hair coming off, and it's like a messy look, and then there's some areas that are kind of reflected in the light. So that's the sort of effect I was trying to go for with the light beige color. Now this is less dramatic than my reference photo where his hair is kind of just like white reflected in the light, but there's also a very dark background and I'm not doing a dark background in this, so it wouldn't really make too much sense to do a super like bright white reflection of light. As I move on to the left side, so the left side is a lot more in the shadows than the right side of his hair, or technically it's the left side of his hair that is lighter, but from our perspective it's the right side. There was a lot more shape and highlight and things like that that you could see, but on the left side you can't really see what's going on. So I went in and just used my black and my sepia to give it a little bit more depth than the black alone would, and I just filled in a lot of that area. Of course I left a few little bumps to kind of indicate that he is still having wavy hair, and there's a couple of locks that are a little bit pulled apart and out of place, so I did want to make sure I didn't forget to draw those. The forehead was a bit challenging because I did blend the skin a little bit too much before going in and doing the hair, which meant it was hard to get some of those strands of hair and flyaways on the forehead just because I had already put so much pigment down. So keep that in mind. If there is like an area on the skin where a lot of hair comes over, be careful, make sure you leave space for that, or maybe even just leave it to work on while you work on the hair. So right now the left side looks a little bit too cartoonish and it doesn't really blend in too well, and it's still a little bit grainy, but I'm going to keep working on that. I do add the strands on his forehead as best as I could. I tried to add some shadows around it as well so it doesn't look just fake and like it's kind of plastered on, as I said before. Now, I also used my eraser to create those highlights on the hair on top of his forehead that are going in different directions. So on the left side, I'm pretty much going to use highlights to indicate direction since you can't really see any individual strands or locks of hair very well. So that's what the stick eraser comes in handy for. And you can also probably tell that I used a little bit of purple and blue tone to give a cool tone shadow. My absolute favorite part of hair is creating those messy locks and strands because it kind of brings it together. It gives more dimension so it's not just some uniform shapes of hair. And I have a lot of fun doing that. When you're doing that, you want to make sure that you're using like flicks on the paper and making it look natural, because if you press too hard with hair, it's not going to get that frayed end sort of look, and it's just going to look a little bit too thick of a line. I also recommend keeping your pencil pretty sharp when you're working on those areas and when you want your hair to sort of taper out on the end like that. But on this side, there were a lot of sort of strands going all over the place, so I portrayed that as best as I could, and I think that's what brought together that side in the end, because there really isn't a lot of shape in the main body of hair. And then of course I used my eraser and my lighter pencils to create a couple of highlights. Again, this hair has a little bit too much of a reddish tone and I didn't really want that, but I kind of just went with it because the sepia turned out to be more of an orangey tone than I thought, and I just went with it. I ended up feeling like that's okay. I'll just incorporate that into the drawing. But of course, if you want more of a cool tone to look, you have to keep that in mind and definitely swatch out your colors beforehand to make sure you're getting the right tone. Alright, well that's all I have for this video. I know it was kind of a short short one. I just wanted to give a few tips on how you can draw hair, or especially in this sort of lighting, or if you're using a reference photo from a movie or something that's more dramatic. So I just thought that this would be something that might be useful to some people. Anyway, I hope you're all doing well. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please leave a comment letting me know what you thought of the tutorial, or even just what you think about the drawing in general, because I do like to hear feedback about things like that. But again, it was just sort of a short little tutorial with a couple of tips on how you can draw short and wavy dark hair. If you would like to, go ahead and check out my other hair tutorials, because I do have a couple other ones for different types of hair, since hair is so different and versatile. But anyway, thank you so much for watching again, and I will see you hopefully in the next video.